I demand a trial by combat.
This is Let's Get Litty Read Along, GOT edition. Escape into the land of Westeros each week as we travel through the Seven Kingdoms. Which house will prevail and rule the Iron Throne, or gain its independence? Is a bigger evil really lurking beyond the wall? With decade-long summers and even longer winters, grab your favorite drink, sit back, and relax because reading is coming. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Let's Get Litty Read Along, Game of Thrones edition. This is episode 6, not to be confused with episode 5 last week, where I kept saying episode 6. This is actually episode 6. It's going to be a little bit longer of an episode this week because we're going to read what would have been last episode's chapter and the new chapter for this week. Okay, welcome back. This week's drink of the week is solely Dr. Pepper, a little good old refreshing deep peppy in our big old cup here. I know these cups are obnoxious and that's why I like it. We're sticking pretty light this week because last week we balled out a little too hard and found ourselves in a little bit of a hiccup situation and a little bit of ramble situation and slur situation. While it was very funny to watch back, and I'm very happy to provide some entertainment to everybody with a blooper episode, I don't know that I could handle that 2 weekends in a row. Like, I just can't ball out like I used to. I need time and space between things. So, Dr. Pepper it is. Grab your favorite drink, though, and we're going to jump right in here. Thank you to everyone who has subscribed, followed, shared, watched. Again, last week, our recap is really nothing. We attempted to read Catelyn's chapter, and there was a maester and Ed. And that's all I really remember. We didn't get through it. I think I reread the same page 4 different times in the video. Lesson for anyone out there who may forget. At some point, all the alcohol catches up to you, right? Like, even when you leave the event and you don't think you've drank that much, or you're like, oh, I still feel pretty good, pretty sober. And so you drink more when you get home. No, it all catches up to you. So I couldn't do anything. Did not read. Had a lot of fun though, so thanks for sticking in there with that one. We're just gonna jump right to it. So this week we are going to do 2 chapters, Catelyn and Arya. Next week will just be one with Bronn, and then Bran. I always want to say Bronn, make it fancier than it is. And then the week after that, we'll be back to 2 because there's some shorter chapters coming up with Tyrion and Jon and Dany. So that's kind of the game plan. So bookmark. As I said last week, who's she? Small reminder, anyone who doesn't have the book but likes to see the pages and wants to actually read along with us each week, you can find the link in the video description to go see all the book pages on our website. I post those for each episode. Just click on the tile and it'll bring up a PDF of the pages for this episode or whatever episode you're viewing. Also, a reminder, if you are just listening to audio only, you can find the video on Spotify, YouTube, or our FMN website. If you're going to subscribe, follow, please do it on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube. Those are where the accounts matter the most. I appreciate everyone going to the FMN site, but that doesn't really do anything to get the podcast on a wider network of audiences. So those are the places to be. Audio only is fine, but you are missing out with some video stuff because I do tend to talk a lot with my facial expressions and hands, and so you do get a lot of extra funny little facials and stuff with the video. But either way, I appreciate you guys all being here. I know I said I'm going to make this quick and stop rambling like 18 times already, but I'm from the Midwest and that's what we do. It's called a Midwest goodbye. So look it up and let's go with Catelyn. Look, Catelyn's dark. I need to get like a book stand to hoist it up for me. One more drink for good measure. Of all the rooms in Winterfell's great keep, Catelyn's bedchambers were the hottest. She seldom had to light a fire. The castle had been built over natural hot springs, and the scalding waters rushed through its walls and chambers like blood through a man's body, driving the chill from the stone halls, filling the glass gardens with a moist warmth, keeping the earth from freezing. Open pools smoked day and night in a dozen small courtyards. That was a little thing in summer. In winter, it was the difference between life and death. Catelyn's bath was always hot and steaming, and her walls warm to the touch. The warmth reminded her of her River Run days in the sun with Liza and Edmure, but Ned could never abide the heat. The Starks were made for the cold. He would tell her, and she would laugh and tell him in that case they had certainly built their castle in the wrong place. So when they had finished, Ned rolled off and climbed from her bed, as he had 1,000 times before. He crossed the room, pulled back the heavy tapestries, and threw open the high, narrow windows one by one, letting the night air into the chamber. The wind swirled around him as he stood facing the dark, naked and empty-handed. Catelyn pulled the furs to her chin and watched him. He looked somehow smaller and more vulnerable. Like the youth she had wed in the Septa River Run 15 long years gone. Her loins still ached from the urgency of his lovemaking. It was a good ache. She could feel his seed within her. She prayed that it might quicken there. It had been 3 years since Rickon. She was not too old. She could give him another son. I will refuse him, Ned said, as he turned back to her. His eyes were haunted, his voice thick with doubt. Catelyn sat up in bed. You cannot. You must not. My duties are here in the north. I have no wish to be Robert's hand. He will not understand that. He is a king now, and kings are not like other men. If you refuse to serve him, he will wonder why, and sooner or later he will begin to suspect that you oppose him. Can't you see the danger that would put us in? Ned shook his head, refusing to believe. Robert would never harm me or any of mine. We were closer than brothers. He loves me. If I refuse him, he will roar and curse and bluster, and in a week we will laugh about it together. I know the man. You knew the man, she said. The king is a stranger to you. Catelyn remembered the dire wolf dead in the snow, the broken antler lodged deep in her throat. She had to make him see. Pride is everything to a king, my lord. Robert came all this way to see you, to bring you these great honors. You cannot throw them back in his face. Honors? Ned laughed bitterly. And in his eyes? Yes, she said. And in yours? And in mine. She blazed, angry now. Why couldn't he see? He offers his own son in marriage to our daughter. What else would you call that? Sansa might someday be queen. Her sons could rule from the wall to the mountains of Dorne. What's so wrong with that? Gods, Catelyn. Sansa is only 11, Ned said. And Joffrey is... She finished for him. Crown prince and heir to the Iron Throne, and I was only 12 when my father promised me to your brother Brandon. That brought a bitter twist to Ned's mouth. Brandon, yes. Brandon would know what to do. He always did. It was all meant for Brandon. You, Winterfell, everything. He was born to be a king's hand and a father to queens. I never asked for this cup to pass to me. Perhaps not, Catelyn said, but Brandon is dead and the cup has passed and you must drink from it, like it or not. Ned turned away from her back to the night. He stood staring out in the darkness, watching the moon and the stars perhaps, or perhaps the sentries on the wall. Catelyn softened then, to see his pain. Eddard Stark had married her in Brandon's place as a custom decreed, but the shadow of his dead brother still lay between them, as did the other, the shadow of the woman he would not name, the woman who had borne him his bastard son. She was about to go to him when the knock came at the door, loud and unexpected. Ned turned, frowning. "What is it?" Desmond's voice came through the door. "My lord, Maester Lewin is without and begs urgent audience." "You told him I had left orders not to be disturbed?" "Yes, my lord, he insists." "Very well, send him in." Ned crossed to the wardrobe and slipped on a heavy robe. Catelyn realized suddenly how cold it had become. She sat up in bed and pulled the furs to her chin. "Perhaps we should close the windows," she suggested. Ned nodded absently. Maester Lewin was shown in. The maester was a small gray man. His eyes were gray and quick and saw much. His hair was gray with what little years had left him. His robe was gray wool, trimmed with white fur, the Stark colors. Its great floppy sleeves had pockets hidden inside. Lewin was always tucking things into those sleeves and producing other things from them. Books, messages, strange artifacts, toys for the children. With all he kept hidden in the sleeves, Catelyn was surprised that Maester Lewin could lift his arms at all. The maester waited until the door had closed behind him before he spoke. "My lord," he said to Ned, "pardon for disturbing your rest. I have been left a message." Ned looked irritated. "Been left? By whom? Has there been a writer? I was not told." "There was no writer, my lord, only a carved wooden box left on a table in my observatory while I napped. My servants saw no one, but it must have been brought by someone in the king's party. We have had no other visitors from the south." "A wooden box, you say?" Catelyn said. Inside was a fine new lens for the observatory. From Meyer, by the look of it. The lens crafter of Meyer are without equal. Ned frowned. He had little patience for this sort of thing, Catelyn knew. "A lens?" he said. "What has that to do with me?" "I asked the same question," Maester Lewin said. Clearly there was more to this than the seeming. Under the heavy weight of her furs, Catelyn shivered. "A lens is an instrument to help us see." "Indeed it is." He fingered the collar of his order, a heavy chain worn tight around the neck beneath the robe, each link forged from a different metal. Catelyn could feel dread stirring inside her once again. What is it that they would have us see more clearly? The very thing I asked myself. Maester Lewin drew a tightly rolled paper out of his sleeve. "I found the true message concealed within a false bottom when I dismantled the box the lens had come in, but it is not for my eyes." Ned held out his hands. "Let me have it, then." Lewin did not stir. "Pardon, my lord, the message is not for you either. It is marked for the eyes of the Lady Catelyn and her alone. May I approach?" Catelyn nodded, not trusting to speak. The maester placed the paper on the table beside the bed. It was sealed with a small blob of blue wax. Lewin bowed and began to retreat. "Stay," Ned commanded him. His voice was grave. He looked at Catelyn. "What is it? My lady, you're shaking." I'm afraid," she admitted. She reached out and took the letter in trembling hands. The furs dropped away from her nakedness, forgotten. In the blue wax was the moon and falcon seal of House Arryn. "It's from Liza." Catelyn looked at her husband. "It will not make us glad," she told him. "There is grief in this message, Ned. I can feel it." Ned frowned, his face darkening. "Open it." Catelyn broke the seal. Her eyes moved over the words. At first they made no sense to her. Then she remembered. Liza took no chances. When we were girls together, we had a private language, she and I. "Can you read it?" "Yes," Catelyn admitted. "Then tell us." "Perhaps I should withdraw," Maester Lewin said. No, Catelyn said. We will need your counsel. She threw back the furs and climbed from the bed. The night air was cold as the grave on her bare skin as she padded across the room. Maester Luwin averted his eyes. Even Ned looked shocked. What are you doing? He asked. Lighting a fire, Catelyn told him. She found a dressing gown and shrugged into it, then knelt over the cold earth. Maester Luwin, Ned began. Maester Luwin has delivered all my children, Catelyn said. This is no time for false modesty. She slid the paper in among the kindling and placed the heavier logs on top of it. Ned crossed the room, took her by the arm, and pulled her to her feet. He held her there, his face inches from her. My lady, tell me, what was the message? Catelyn stiffened in his grasp. A warning, she said softly. If we have the wits to hear. His eyes searched her face. Go on. Lysa says Jon Arryn was murdered. His fingers tightened around her arm. By whom? The Lannisters, she told him. The Queen. Ned released his hold on her arm. There were deep red marks on her skin. Gods, he whispered. His voice was hoarse. Your sister is sick with grief. She cannot know what she is saying. She knows, Catelyn said. Lysa is impulsive, yes, but this message was carefully planned, carefully hidden. She knew it meant death if her letter fell into the wrong hands. To risk so much, she must have had more than mere suspicion. Catelyn looked to her husband. Now we truly have no choice. You must be Robert's hand. You must go south with him and learn the truth. She saw at once that Ned had reached a very different conclusion. The only truths I know are here. The South is a nest of aiders I would do better to avoid. Luwin picked at his chain collar where it had chafed the soft skin of his throat. The hand of the king has great power, my lord. Power to find the truth of Lord Arryn's death, to bring his killers to the king's justice. Power to protect Lady Arryn and her son if the worst would be true. Ned glanced helplessly around the bedchamber. Catelyn's heart went out to him, but she knew she could not take him in her arms just then. First victory must be won for her children's sake. You say you love Robert like a brother. Would you leave your brother surrounded by Lannisters? The others take both of you, Ned muttered darkly. He turned away from them and went to the window. She did not speak, nor did the maester. They waited quiet, while Eddard Stark said a silent farewell to the home he loved. When he turned away from the window at last, his voice was tired and full of melancholy, and moisture glittered faintly in the corners of his eyes. My father went south once to answer the summons of a king. He never came home. A little foreshadowing. A different time, Maester Luwin said. A different king. I just cannot get comfortable. Let's take a quick drink. Because we made it through the week. Yes, Ned, said Dolly. He seated himself in a chair by his hearth. Catelyn, you shall stay here in Winterfell. His words were like an icy draught through her heart. No, she said, suddenly afraid. Was this to be her punishment, never to see his face again, nor to feel his arms around her? Yes, Ned said in words that would brook no argument. You must govern the north in my stead while I run Robert's errands. There must always be a Stark in Winterfell. Robb is 14. Soon enough he will be a man grown. He must learn to rule, and I will not be here for him. Make him part of your councils. He must be ready when the time comes. God's will, not for many years, Maester Luwin murmured. Maester Luwin, I trust you as I would my own blood. Give my wife your voice in all things great and small. Teach my son the things he needs to know. Winter is coming. Maester Luwin nodded gravely. Then silence fell until Catelyn found her courage and asked the question whose answer she most dreaded. What of the other children? Ned stood and took her in her arms and held her face close to his. Rickon is very young, he said gently. He should stay here with you and Rob. The others I would take with me. I could not bear it, Catelyn said, trembling. You must, he said. Sansa must wed Joffrey. That is clear now. We must give them no grounds to suspect our devotion, and it is past time that Arya learn the ways of a southern court. In a few years she will be of an age to marry too. Sansa would shine in the south, Catelyn thought to herself, and the gods knew that Arya needed refinement. Reluctantly, she let go of them in her heart, but not Bran. Never Bran. Yes, she said, but please, Ned, for the love you bear me, let Bran remain here at Winterfell. He is only 7. I was 8 when my father sent me to the foster in the Eyrie, Ned said. Sir Roderick tells me there is bad feeling between... Okay. Ooh, I need glasses. Sir Roderick tells me there is a bad feeling between Robb and Prince Joffrey. That is not healthy. Bran can bridge the distance. He is a sweet boy, quick to laugh, easy to love. Let him grow up with the young princes. Let him become their friends as Robert became mine. Our house will be safer for it. He was right. Catelyn knew it. It did not make the pain any easier to bear. She would lose all 4 of them. Then Ned and both girls and her sweet, loving Bran. Only Robb and little Rickon would be left to her. She felt lonely already. Winterfell was such a vast place. Keep him off the walls then, she said bravely. You know how Bran loves to climb. Ned kissed the tears from her eyes before they could fall. Thank you, my lady, he whispered. This is hard, I know. What of Jon Snow, my lord? Maester Luwin asked. Catelyn tensed at the mention of his name. Ned felt the anger in her and pulled away. Many men fathered bastards. Catelyn had grown up with that knowledge. It also came as no surprise to her in the first year of marriage to learn that Ned had followed a child on some girl chance met on campaign. He had a man's needs after all, and they had spent that year apart, Ned off at war in the south, while she remained safe in her father's castle at Riverrun. Her thoughts were more of Robb, the infant at her breast, than of the husband she scarcely knew. He was welcome to whatever solace he might find between battles, and if his seed quickened, she expected he would see to the child's needs. He did more than that. The Starks were not like other men. Ned brought his bastard home with him and called him son for all the North to see. When the wars were over at last and Catelyn rode to Winterfell, Jon and his wet nurse had already taken up precedence. That cut deep. Ned would not speak of the mother, not so much as a word, but a castle has no secrets, and Catelyn heard her maids repeating tales they heard from the lips of her husband's soldiers. They whispered of Sir Arthur Dane, the sword of the morning, deadliest of the 7 knights of Ares' Kingsguard, and of how their young lord had slain him in single combat. And they told how afterward Ned had carried Sir Arthur's sword back to the beautiful young sister who awaited him in a castle called Starfell on the shores of the summer sea. The lady Ashara Dane, tall and fair, with haunting violet eyes. It had taken her a fortnight to marshal her courage, but finally in bed one night, Catelyn had asked her husband of the truth, asked him to his face. That was the only time in all the years that Ned had ever frightened her. Never ask me about Jon, he said, cold as ice. He is my blood, and that is all you need to know. And now I will learn where you heard that name, my lady. She had pledged to obey, she told him. And from that day on, and whispering had stopped, and Ashara Dane's name was never heard in Winterfell again. Whoever Jon's mother had been, Ned must have loved her fiercely, for nothing, Catelyn said, would persuade him to send the boy away. It was one thing she could never forgive him. She had come to love her husband with all her heart, but she had never found it in her to love Jon. She might have overlooked a dozen bastards for Ned's sake, so long as they were out of sight. John was never out of sight. As he grew, he looked more like Ned than any of the true-born sons she bore him. Somehow, that made it worse. John must go, she said now. He and Rob are close, Ned said. I had hoped he could not stay here, Catelyn said, cutting him off. He is your son, not mine. I will not have him. It was hard, she knew, but no less the truth. Ned would do the boy no kindness by leaving him here in Winterfell. The look Ned gave her was anguished. You know I cannot take him south. There will be no place for him at the court. A boy with a bastard's name. You know what they will say of him. He will be shunned. Catelyn armored her heart against the mute appeal in her husband's eyes. They say your friend Robert had fathered a dozen bastards himself, and none of them have ever seen at court, Ned blazed. The Lannister woman has seen to that. How can you be so damnably cruel, Catelyn? He is only a boy. His fury was on him. He might have said more and worse, but Maester Luwin couldn't. Another solution presents itself, he said, his voice quiet. Your brother Benjen came to me about John a few days ago. It seems the boy aspires to take the black. Ned looked shocked. He asked to join the Night's Watch? Catelyn said nothing. Let Ned work it out in his own mind. Her voice would not be welcome now, yet gladly she would have kissed the maester just then. His was the perfect solution. Benjen Stark was a sworn brother. John would be a son to him, the child he would never have. And in time, the boy would take the oath as well. He would father no sons who might someday contest with Catelyn's own grandchildren for Winterfell. Maester Luwin said, There is great honor and service on the wall, my lord, and even a bastard may raise high in the Night's Watch, Ned reflected. Still, his voice was troubled. John is so young. If he asked this when he was a man grown, that would be one thing, but a boy of 14? A hard sacrifice, Maester Luwin agreed. Yet, these are hard times, my lord. His road is no crueler than yours or your lady's. Catelyn thought of the 3 children she must lose. It was not easy keeping silent then. Ned turned away from them to gaze out the window, his long face silent and thoughtful. Finally he sighed and turned back. Very well, he said to Maester Luwin. I suppose it is for the best. I will speak to Ben. When shall we tell John? The maester asked. When I must. Preparations must be made. It will be a fortnight before we are ready to depart. I would sooner let John enjoy the last days. Summer will end soon enough, and childhood as well. When the time comes, I will tell him myself. Little deep puppy sip. And a little sip for whatever you guys are drinking tonight. Now, I'll tell you this. I do not remember any of what we just read, except for Maester Luwin. Reading comprehension was not happening last week. Moving on into the second chapter of the week, we've got Arya, our girl. She's a badass. She's a killer. Arya's stitches were crooked again. She frowned down at them with dismay and glanced over to where her sister Sansa had sat among the other girls. Sansa's needlework was exquisite. Everyone said so. Sansa's work is as pretty as she is, Septa Mordain told their lady mother once. She has such a fine, delicate hand. When Lady Catelyn had asked about Arya and Septa and had sniffed, Arya has the hands of a blacksmith. Arya glanced furtively across the room, worried that Septa Mordain might have read her thoughts, but the Septa was paying her no attention today. You guys are getting real-time learning lessons that I'm getting, because I've never seen that word in my entire life, and I'm going to start needing phonics posted around the room to be able to sound some of these things out. I don't know about anyone else, but I don't consider myself a genius. I don't consider myself stupid, but then when I try to read things like this, I feel very stupid. Guess I should have graduated college." She was sitting with the Princess Marcella, all smiles and admiration. It was not often that the Septa was privileged to instruct a royal princess in the womanly arts, as she had said when the queen brought Marcella to join them. Arya thought that Marcella's stitches looked a little crooked too, but you would never know it from the way Septa Mordane was cooing. She studied her own work again, looking for some way to salvage it, then sighed and put down the needle. She looked gloomily at her sister. Sansa was chatting away happily as she worked. Beth Cassel, Sir Roderick's little girl, was sitting by her feet, listening to every word she said, and Jean Poole was leaning over to whisper something in her ear. "What are you talking about?" Arya said suddenly. Jean gave her a startled look, then giggled. Sansa looked abashed. Beth blushed. No one answered. "Tell me," Arya said. Jean glanced over to make certain that Septa Mordane was not listening. Marcella said something then, and the Septas laughed along with the rest of the ladies. "We were talking about the prince," Sansa said, her voice with a soft kiss. Arya knew which prince she meant. Joffrey, of course. The tall, handsome one. Sansa got to sit with him at the feast. Arya had to sit with the little fat one, naturally. "Joffrey likes your sister," Jean whispered, proud as if she had something to do with it. She was the daughter of Winterfell's steward and Sansa's dearest friend. He told her that she was very beautiful. "He's going to marry her," little Beth said dreamily, hugging herself. "Then Sansa will be queen of all the realm." Sansa had the grace to blush. She blushed prettily. She did everything prettily. Arya thought with dull resentment. "Beth, you shouldn't make up stories," Sansa corrected the younger girl, gently stroking her hair to take the harshness out of her words. She looked at Arya. "What did you think of Prince Joff, sister?" "He's very gallant, don't you think?" "John says he looks like a girl," Arya said. Sansa sighed as she stitched. "Poor John," she said. "He gets jealous because he's a bastard." "He's our brother," Arya said, much too loudly. Her voice cut through the afternoon quiet of the tower room. Septa Mordane raised her eyes. She had a bony face, sharp eyes, and thin, lipless mouth made for frowning. It was frowning now. "What are you talking about, children?" "Our half-brother," Sansa corrected, soft and precise. She smiled for the Septa. "Arya and I were remarking on how pleased we were to have the princess with us today," she said. Septa Mordane nodded. "Indeed, a great honor for us all." Princess Marcella smiled uncertainly at the compliment. "Arya, why aren't you at work?" the Septa asked. She rose to her feet, starched skirts rustling as she started across the room. "Let me see your stitches." Arya wanted to scream. It was just like Sansa to go and attract the Septa's attention. "Here," she said, surrendering up her work. The Septa examined the fabric. "Arya, Arya, Arya," she said. "This will not do. This will not do at all." Everyone was looking at her. It was too much. Sansa was too well bred to smile at her sister's disgrace, but Jean was smirking on her behalf. Even Princess Marcella looked sorry for her. Arya felt tears filling her eyes. She pushed herself out of her chair and bolted for the door. Septa Mordane called after her. "Arya, come back here. Don't you take another step. Your lady mother will hear of this, in front of our royal princess too. You'll shame us all." Arya stopped at the door and turned back, biting her lip, the tears running down her cheeks now. She managed a stiff little bow to Marcella. "By your leave, my lady." Marcella blinked at her and looked to her ladies for guidance. But if she was uncertain, Septa Mordane was not. "Just where do you think you are going, Arya?" the Septa demanded. Arya glared at her. "I have to go shoe a horse," she said sweetly, taking a brief satisfaction in the shock of Septa's face. Then she whirled and made her exit, running down the steps as fast as her feet could take. It was unfair. Sansa had everything. She was 2 years older. Maybe by the time Arya had been born, there had been nothing left. Often it felt that way. Sansa could sew and dance and sing. She wrote poetry. She knew how to dress. She played the high harp and the bells. Worse, she was beautiful. Sansa had gotten their mother's fine high cheekbones and the thick auburn hair of the Tullys. Arya took after their lord father. Her hair was a lustrous brown and her face was long and solemn. Jane used to call her Arya Horseface and neigh whenever she came near. It hurt that the one thing Arya could do better than her sister was ride a horse. Well, that and manage a household. Sansa had never had much of a head for figures. If she did marry Prince Joff, Arya hoped for his sake that he had a good steward. Nymeria was waiting for her in the guard room at the base of the stairs. She bounded to her feet as soon as she caught sight of Arya. Arya grinned. The wolf pup loved her, even if no one else did. They went everywhere together, and Nymeria slept in her room and at the foot of her bed. If Mother had not forbidden it, Arya would gladly have taken the wolf with her to needlework. Let Septa complain about her stitches then. Nymeria nipped eagerly at her hand as Arya untied her. She had yellow eyes. When they caught the sunlight, they gleamed like 2 golden coins. Arya had named her after the warrior queen of Rohan, who had led her people across the narrow sea. That had been a great scandal too. Sansa, of course, had named her pup Lady. Arya made a face and hugged the wolfling tight. Nymeria licked her ear and she giggled. By now, Septa would certainly have sent word to her lady mother. If she went to her room, they would find her. Arya did not care to be found. She had a better notion. The boys were at practice in the yard. She wanted to see Robb put gallant Prince Joffrey flat on his back. "Come," she whispered to Nymeria. She got up and ran, the wolf coming hard at her heels. There was a window in the covered bridge between the armory and the great keep where you had a view of the whole yard. That was where they were headed. They arrived flushed and breathless to find Jon seated on the sill, one leg drawn up languidly to his chin. He was watching the action, so absorbed that he seemed unaware of her approach until his white wolf moved to meet them. Nymeria stalked closer on weary feet. Ghost, already larger than his littermates, smelled her, gave her ear a careful nip, and settled back down. Jon gave her a curious look. "Shouldn't you be working on your stitches, little sister?" Arya made a face at him. "I wanted to see him fight." He smiled. "Come here, then." Arya climbed up on the window and sat beside him to a chorus of thuds and grunts from the yard below. To her disappointment, it was the younger boy's drill. Bran was so heavily padded he looked as though he had belted on a feather bed, and Prince Tommen, who was plump to begin with, seemed positively round. They were huffing and puffing and hitting each other with padded wood, sword, and watchful eyes of Sir Roderick Cassel, the master-at-arms, a great stout keg of a man with magnificent white-cheek whiskers. A dozen spectators, man and boy, were calling out encouragement, Robb's voice the loudest among them. She spotted Theon Greyjoy beside him, his black doublet emblazoned with the golden kraken of his house, a look weary of contempt on his face. Both the combatants were staggering. Arya judged that they had been at it a while. "A shade more exhausting than needlework," Jon observed. "A shade more fun than needlework," Arya gave back at him. Jon grinned, reached over, and messed up her hair. Arya flushed. They had always been close. Jon had their father's face as she did. They were the only ones. Robb and Sansa and Bran, and even little Rickon all took after the Tullys, with easy smiles and fire in their hair. When Arya had been little, she had been afraid that meant that she was a bastard too. It had been Jon she had gone to in her fear, and Jon who reassured her. "Why aren't you down in the yard?" Arya asked him. He gave her a half smile. "Bastards are not allowed to damage young princes, he said. "Any bruises they take in the practice yard must come from true-born swords." "Oh," Arya felt abashed. She should have realized. For the second time today, Arya reflected the life was not fair. She watched her little brother whack Tommen. I could do just as good as Bran, she said. He's only 7, I'm 9. Jon looked over with all his 14-year-old wisdom. You're too skinny, he said. He took her arm to feel her muscle. Then he sighed and shook his head. I thought you could even lift a long sword, little sister. Never mind swing one. Arya snatched back her arm and glared at him. Jon messed up her hair again. They watched Bran and Tommen circle each other. You see Prince Joffrey? Jon asked. She hadn't, not at first. But when she looked again, she found him to the back under the shade of the high stone wall. He was surrounded by men she did not recognize, young squires in the livery of Lannister and Baratheon. Strangers all. There were a few older men among them. Knights, she surmised. Look at the arms on his surcoat, Jon suggested. Arya looked. An ornate shield had been embroidered on the prince's padded surcoat. No doubt the needlework was exquisite. The arms were divided down the middle. On one side was the crowned stag of the royal house, on the other side the lion of the Lannisters. The Lannisters are proud, Jon observed. You'd think the royal sigil would be sufficient, but no. He makes his mother's house equal in honor to the king's. The woman is important too, Arya protested. Jon chuckled. Perhaps you should do the same thing, little sister. Wed Tully to Stark in your arms. A wolf with a fish in its mouth? It made her laugh. That would look silly. Besides, if a girl can't fight, why should she have a coat of arms? Jon shrugged. Girls get the arms, but not the swords. Bastards get the swords, but not the arms. I did not make the rules, little sister. There was a shout from the courtyard below. Prince Tommen was rolling in the dust, trying to get up and failing. All the padding made him look like a little turtle on its back. Bran was standing over him with upraised wooden sword, ready to whack him once he regained his feet. The men began to laugh. Enough, Sir Roderick called out. He gave the prince a hand and yeeked him back to his feet. Well fought. Blue, Donis, helped them get out of their armor. He looked around. Prince Joffrey, Robb, will you go another round? Robb, already sweaty from a previous bout, moved forward eagerly. Gladly. Joffrey moved into the sunlight in response to Roderick's summons. His hair shone like spun gold. He looked bored. This is a game for children, Sir Roderick. Theon Greyjoy gave a sudden bark of laughter. You are children, he said, dearisvily. Derisvely? Robb may be a child, Joffrey said. I am a prince, and I grow tired of swatting at Starks with a plate sword. You got more swats than you gave, Robb said. Are you afraid? Prince Joffrey looked at him. Oh, terrified, he said. You're so much older. Some of the Lannister men laughed. Jon looked down on the scene with a frown. Joffrey is truly a little shit, he told Arya. Sir Roderick tugged thoughtfully at his white whiskers. What are you suggesting? He asked the prince. Live steel. Done, Robb shot back. You'll be sorry. The Master at Arms put a hand on Robb's shoulder to quiet him. Live steel is too dangerous. I will permit you turning swords with blunted edges. Joffrey said nothing, but a man strange to Arya, a tall knight with black hair and burn scars on his face, pushed forward in the front of the prince. This is your prince. Who are you to tell him he may not have an edge on his sword, sir? Maester at Arms of Winterfell, Clegane, and you would do well not to forget it. Are you training women here? The burn man wanted to know. He was muscled like a bull. I am training knights, Sir Roderick said pointedly. They will have steel when they are ready, when they are of age. The burn man looked at Robb. How old are you, boy? 14, Robb said. I killed a man at 12. You can be sure it was not with a blunt sword. Arya could see Robb bristle. His pride was wounded. He turned on Sir Roderick. Let me do it. I can beat him. Beat him with a churning blade, then, Sir Roderick said. Joffrey shrugged. Come and see me when you're older, Stark, if you're not too old. There was laughter from the Lannister men. Robb's curses rang through the yard. Arya covered her mouth in shock. The young Greyjoy seized Rob's arm to keep him away from the prince. Sir Roderick tugged at his whiskers in dismay. Joffrey feigned a yawn and turned to his younger brother. "Come, Tommen," he said. "The hour of play is done. Leave the children to their frolics." That brought more laughter from the Lannisters, more curses from Robb. Sir Roderick's face was beet red with fury under the white of his whiskers. Theon kept Robb locked in an iron grip until the princess and their party were safely away. Jon watched them leave, and Arya watched Jon. His face had grown as still as the pool of heart of the Godswoods. Finally, he climbed down off the window. "The show is done," he said. He bent to scratch Ghost behind the ears. The wolf rose and rubbed against him. "You had best run back to your room, little sister. Septa Mordain will surely be lurking. The longer you hide, the sterner the penance. You'll be sewing all through winter. When the spring thaw comes, they will find your body with the needle still locked tight between your frozen fingers." Arya didn't think it was funny. "I hate needlework," she said with passion. "It's not fair." "Nothing is fair," Jon said. He messed up his hair again and walked away from her, Ghost moving silently beside him. Nymeria started to follow too, then stopped and came back when she saw that Arya was not coming. Reluctantly, she turned in the other direction. It was worse than Jon had thought. It wasn't Septa Mordain reading in her room. It was Septa Mordain and her mother. All right, everyone. Those are our 2 chapters for this episode. Got some bright light there. Really catching the highlighter. Yeah, thank you for joining. For anyone that doesn't know why I can't see, this doesn't look like a big book, right? I mean, it's a thick book, but it doesn't look huge. The words are so tiny on this thing that my eyes just like cross sometimes. So when you hear me pause and glitch out, it's because I'm trying to read the freaking words that are microscopic. That's also why it takes so long to get through some of these chapters and why we only read one sometimes, because even though it's only maybe 6 to 9 pages, that's not a whole lot, but with the tiny words, it's kind of like 2 pages in one most times. So again, next week we'll be back with one chapter. Just one next week. Share, like, follow, please, 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 anything. Okay, so go ahead and hit that follow, subscribe, share it. We'll be back next week. Another drink, another chapter. Stay safe, stay litty. Signing out.